Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's Cambridge University Press ELT webinar. I'm Alistair Horn from Cambridge University Press ELT, and I'm moderating today's session along with my colleague Lucia Dacic. So we're here to help with any queries you may have. I'm very pleased to welcome as today's presenter, Penny Ur. Penny was educated at the universities of Oxford, Cambridge, and Reading. She emigrated to Israel in 1967, where she still lives today. She has 30 years' experience as an English teacher in elementary, middle, and high schools in Israel. Though now retired, she's taught MA courses at Oronim Academic College of Education and Haifa University. She's presented papers at TESOL, IATEFL, and various other English teachers' conferences worldwide. She's published a number of articles and was for 10 years the editor of the Cambridge Handbooks for Language Teachers series. Her books include Discussions That Work, 5-minute activities, a course in language teaching, and grammar practice activities, all published by Cambridge University Press. And her newest book is a new edition of Discussions That Work entitled Discussions and More. We're going to offer you a chance to win a copy of that book at the end of this webinar, so there's an exclusive competition. Okay, over to you, Penny.
Thank you very much, Alistair, and welcome to everybody. It's a great pleasure to be here. Virtually be here with everybody. I hope you can all hear me clearly, and I'm assuming so, because on the test a few minutes ago everybody said yes, so that's okay. And we'll get started. I'm talking today then about the topic of the book that Alistair was just talking about, Discussions and More, but actually a particular aspect of it, which is, as it says here, getting students to talk when they don't really want to very much. We have a problem with a lot of our students that they're very shy, or various other things I'll be going into later, and they just are very reluctant to talk. And I'm going to be talking about some simple practical principles and actual practical activities that can perhaps get over this problem. So we'll look at the problems first. Just shyness. People don't like to draw attention to themselves. They prefer to sit in the background. I expect a lot of you feel like that, prefer just to sit in the back of the class and enjoy the lesson without actually drawing attention to myself in any way. Sometimes lack of confidence in their own knowledge of their language. They're okay with speaking their own language, but they're worried about trying to say something in a language they're not quite comfortable in. Some are afraid of making mistakes. They're used to the idea that they should, if they express themselves in the foreign language, they ought to do it correctly, and find it very difficult to risk making a mistake. Fear of losing face, fear of I might be ashamed of myself. I might feel that I'm making a fool of myself, that I'm not looking very respectable. And that can be quite a serious problem for both children and adults. So let's look at some preliminaries first. I'll go into the practical ideas later. But in principle, first of all, we need to create situations where, first of all, students feel comfortable with the people they are talking to. And secondly, the demands are well within their ability. They know they can succeed. They know their speech will be well received, and that they know that the activity is interesting and fun to do, so they're motivated to do it. I'll just deal with each of these in turn a little bit more at length. First of all, they need to feel comfortable with the people they're talking to, not only with me, the teacher, but with the other people in the class. They need to feel there is a supportive classroom climate, and that there's familiarity and friendliness around. And the conclusion from this is not to start doing discussion or oral fluency activities until everyone knows everyone. So it might be worth not doing it for the first few weeks until everyone knows everyone and there's a comfortable classroom climate, and then you feel you can move into it. My second point was point about the demands of the speaking task, that they should feel that the demands are well within their ability, they're not too difficult. A lot of the particularly topic-based speaking tasks that sometimes you find in textbooks are really, really difficult. So we need to make sure that they're easy. The main difficulty is vocabulary. Don't have to worry about grammar too much. It's the vocabulary which makes the problems with both ability to express oneself and understanding what other people are saying. Sorry, went back and I should have gone forward. So we need to make sure that the task requires the use of familiar vocabulary and or global expressions they know by heart, or even the use of entire spoken text they know by heart. I'll talk about these later in some examples, but it's perfectly okay to have oral fluency activities based partly or completely on things they know by heart, and they can work very well and be very morale boosting. The third point was that they know they can succeed, what I call success orientation, that I know in advance that the task I'm setting them to do is one that they will succeed in. This goes for all kinds of activities, not just oral fluency. So it has a goal which is very clearly achievable. They know they can do it. It's clear, simple, within their abilities. It is short. It's not a long drawn out thing. They're not going to have to talk for ages. They know it's only going to take 5 minutes, 10 minutes maximum, enough. And simple to understand, straightforward. The fourth point, they know that their speech will be well received. They know that you're going to receive it well. And so what we need to do as teachers is when someone says something, particularly a student who is really reluctant to talk normally and at last is getting up there and saying something, first of all, nod and smile, obviously. And look, I've written there, don't be effusive. Don't say, oh, that's wonderful. What a great thing to say. I'm really pleased you're speaking. That'll draw exactly the attention which they're trying to avoid, a lot of these students. A lot of them are saying, yes, I'd like to talk, but I don't want people to look at me, stare at me, pay too much attention to me. So don't draw too much attention to someone who has at last spoken. Nod, smile in a matter-of-fact sort of way. Great, let's move on. That was a really nice contribution. Echo is a nice one, a nice tip. What they've said, you echo it. Say it again yourself. They say something like, I think this is a really good idea. So you say, Elena says that this is a really good idea. So you're echoing what they're saying, and your echoing is in itself an affirmation, a sort of compliment, an implicit compliment, an idea that they are saying something which is worthwhile and worth repeating. Don't correct. I'm not saying never correct. I think there are places when we do need to correct during an oral fluency activity, but not with the reluctant students. The reluctant students that are at last speaking, so we don't want to put them off by correcting them. Finally, my fifth point was that we have to have an activity which is interesting and fun to do. Okay, I could spend an hour talking about, and I have done in the past, talking about how to make activities interesting. But a few quick tips here. One or more of the following. So a clear and achievable goal. They know where they're going. Opportunities for students to express their own ideas, opinions, tastes, experiences. In other words, personalization. I can say my own thing. I can talk about myself and what I feel or think. Game-like challenges, and I'll be talking about that a little bit later and giving some examples. So it's rather like a game rather than just an oral fluency activity. Visual materials are really, really helpful. If you don't have visual materials, what very often happens is that students look for something to look at because the visual channel is so dominant, and they find something else to look at which is actually distracting. So you really need to give them something to look at, and pictures or any other kinds of visuals are really good bases for oral activities, and they do draw attention and keep attention. Then finally, there's the use of language play, just playing with funny ideas, even if it's not really exactly a game, but sometimes playing with ideas, playing with vocabulary, playing with interactions. And again, I'll give some examples later and remind you that this is what I meant. Okay, just before we go on to the actual activities, before you start, I want to talk about doing a little sort of pep talk or introduction. Most of you I see are in various countries around the world, and you obviously know the language of your students, so it can be very useful to do this in L1 to relax them. An introduction saying, look, this is, as I say, not right at the beginning of the course, but into the course. We're going to do some activities to get you talking. And it's really important to do these activities because knowing how to speak English fluency is one of the most important things in knowing a language. So we need to do this, and you need to make an effort to participate because it's really important for your own progress. I know that it's difficult for some people, but we'll do everything we can to help, and you tell me if there are any problems that I can help with. You really need to make an effort, please, to participate because of the importance. I'm not going to correct mistakes, and mistakes really don't matter so much in oral fluency activities. So don't worry about it if you make a mistake. As long as I understand what you mean, it really doesn't matter. And try to hold back from correcting each other for the same reason, okay? And help each other by responding supportively, nodding your head, smiling. Help with a needed word if you can. This is what I'm telling them to do with each other, okay, rather than just me supporting. So we try to, in the introductory talk, before we start oral fluency activities, to set the stage, as it were, and set the baseline. These are the things we're going to try and do. This is the situation. I know that it can be difficult, but really, really important, and we'll do all we can to make it fun and a pleasant experience. The other thing which it's useful to do on a practical level is teach some useful expressions well in advance and make sure that they know them. Things like, how do you say in English? Sorry, what did you say? Asking for repetition. What does X mean? And assenting expressions like yes, right, absolutely, great. I don't agree is not so useful because in these kinds of conversations, disagreement is actually less common, but you can teach them how to express reservations politely. I'm not sure, what about, things like that. Okay, I'm going to move on to talking about practical activities, but I'm actually going to give myself a break for a second, have a drink of water, and invite you to make any comments you'd like, and I can look at the chat box while I have a couple of minutes silence to see your comments or any questions that you'd like to make. So on what I've said so far. Matthew says, aren't there also some drawbacks to echoing? Yes, there are drawbacks to everything. If you'd like to ask a question about that later, I'll go into that a bit more. Lawrence says, if we speak in the L1, it takes up valuable time in the short lesson. Yes, but if we speak in the target language and they're not understanding, that's a complete waste of time. So we need really to make sure that either we are speaking very clear, comprehensible English, or where we want to get across a message that we cannot say in English because they don't understand it, then we will use the mother tongue in order to save time. It's a time-saving strategy. And in this case, the preliminary talk about why it's important to do oral fluency activities. Yes, I'll do it in English if they have enough English to manage, but if they're beginners, and a lot of the reluctant speakers are fairly low level, then I'll use mother tongue, in your case Hebrew, and in my case actually. Ideal size of the class for students to be comfortable. Yes, if it's very, very large, obviously it makes it much more difficult, certainly. Ideal size, I would say about 15 to 20, but most of us are teaching in classes that are larger than that, and we have to get our students comfortable with speaking even with very big classes, because otherwise they won't talk at all. And of course later on we'll divide them into groups, which is much easier for them to talk. Question about, I was scolded because I didn't stop to correct students. I think you are absolutely right not to stop to correct them, and if your inspector or teacher trainer told you you should, then I think they were wrong. So stick to what you think is right. Yes. Yes, Sancho, this is exactly the problem I'm talking about. Sometimes students refuse to speak in L2. They prefer not to talk at all. Absolutely. And this is what the problem which this entire webinar is about, and I'm moving on to. Okay, Remedios, just one last comment on your comment here. Should we let our students speak with mistakes, or should we let them speak and then when they finish comment on their mistakes? You can comment on mistakes later, but I think it's really important not to interrupt them while they're speaking. And whether you have a later session where you comment on mistakes is up to you. I don't think it's absolutely essential in any case to correct every mistake. Okay, some lovely ideas coming up, but I can't keep up with them and I can't answer all of them. I'll ask Alistair at the end of the session to forward me any questions which are still outstanding and which you want me to answer. Let's move on to the next part of the webinar, which is activities, practical activities. And I'm going to move from the very, very structured ones, which it's fairly easy to participate in, to more and more difficult ones, although I will not go to the most challenging ones because that isn't part of this webinar. I'm looking only at the kind of activities which are likely to support reluctant speakers in their speaking of English. So easing in, okay, gradually. So starting off with standard vocabulary grammar exercises and using them as a springboard to move into oral fluency practice. Then oral fluency practice based on pre-learned chunks of text, things that they've actually learned by heart. Then oral fluency work based on scaffolding. That's to say, they're asked to say things which you're helping them to say in some way. You've given them the framework or a grammatical pattern or something like that. And finally, oral fluency work based on their own self-expression, but still fairly easy to cope with from the point of view of level and challenge. Okay, let's look at the first one. Using grammar and vocabulary exercises. So let's look at this one. Here's a vocabulary exercise. Match A and B. You can throw, wear, break, write, or leave the house, an email, a ball, a shirt, a glass. And so you're asked to say, you can throw a ball, you can wear a shirt, and so on, which is fairly standard, fairly easy. It's not really oral fluency. But you can use this as a springboard into an oral fluency exercise by deleting one of the columns. So you say to them, Tell me things you can throw, okay? If you can type in sort of as we're going, some things that they might say here. So, for example, you can throw a ball, but you can throw a party, right? That's a fairly advanced student there. Throw a party. You can wear a shirt. You can wear jeans. You can wear, and it's very, very structured, and it's using vocabulary, but it's also allowing them freedom of expression. And we're just beginning to do things in oral fluency. Or you can do it the other way around. What can you do with the house? What can you do with an email? What can you do with a ball other than throw it? What can you do with a shirt? What can you do with a glass? So the shirt, you can wear it. You can also wash it or iron it or tear it or lose it or dirty it and all sorts of things. Okay, lovely ideas coming in here. So you get students brainstorming all sorts of ideas, and they're actually expressing themselves semi-freely in English, and they're just beginning oral fluency responses. Or, one step further, here are the verbs. Make a true statement about yourself using any of these. So what can you say about yourself now? I am wearing a grey sweater. You can't see me, but I am, believe me. I have written a book, okay? I can say about myself, and you can say all sorts of things, and they can brainstorm ideas of their own. The advantages of these, I'll come on to advantages later, sorry, I'm skipping a bit. Grammar exercises. Here's a standard grammar exercise, which is not for oral fluency, but is simply to practice the present perfect, very structured. As it stands, it doesn't really help us very much, but if we adapt it like this, we just delete the verb in parenthesis at the end of each line, and we say to the students, what has happened? Lena can't find a key. What do you think has happened? Okay, it's structured around the present perfect, but it invites personalized, interesting, varied responses. What might she have done? What might have happened? Maybe she has lost it. Maybe someone has stolen it. Maybe she has forgotten it at home. Maybe the dog, thank you, Patricia, the dog ate Lena's key, and so on. Peter weighed 80 kilos before, now he weighs 60. What do you think has happened to Peter? So maybe he's been on a diet, but maybe also he has been sick, or maybe a student of mine suggested he has fallen in love and is now losing weight. Oh well, all sorts of possible answers there. Some nice, very nice responses coming in here. So it's fun, and we can use this, as I say, as a basis for students' oral responses. The principle is almost any standard grammar or vocabulary exercise can be made into a simple oral exercise by opening it to multiple responses. And the way you do this is you simply delete, as I did just now, the prescribed choice of answers and invite open completion. So you delete the bank of words they could put into a gap, or you delete one column of a matching exercise, or you delete the options in a multiple choice, and you invite students to make all sorts of answers themselves, and you're already into simple oral interactions. And the advantages are that the responses are short, structured, easy to complete, based on a very, very familiar format, which they're comfortable with. Because you have all sorts of responses to similar roots, therefore there's an opportunity for modeling by the first responders, who are usually the more confident students. So they model the answers, and the later ones can use those models, the shyer ones can use those models as a basis for their own responses. Success-oriented is very likely to be successful, and as we've seen with the exercise we just did, can be very amusing because the answers are free and can be humorous and original. Then, apart from vocabulary and grammar exercise, my next category is using pre-learnt texts, particularly chants. These have been popularized very much by Carolyn Graham, and I do recommend that you look her up on the internet and see her stuff, because it's absolutely brilliant. Something like this, which is chanted in a rhythm which replicates the rhythm of normal speech. So, hi, Lou, how are you? Hi, Lou, how are you? Hi, Kate, I'm feeling great, and how are you? It's a rap, really. We would call it a rap today, but it's usually called chants in the literature, or jazz chants. And these can be performed in chorus. They involve useful interactive chunks, which the students can then use in their own interaction later. How are you? I'm feeling fine. For example, they replicate the rhythm of normal speech, and there's no possibility of making mistakes because you've learnt it by heart and you know it's correct English, so you can say it with confidence. The fact that chants are often done chorally means that shy students can say them, as it were, under the shelter of the other students. So nobody's listening to them, but they are actually saying while other students are saying at the same time. Later, of course, they can do it in pairs or in small groups or even individually. And I very much recommend, as I said, sorry, keep pressing on the wrong thing there, look at the books by Carolyn Graham on jazz chants, and also she has YouTubes where you can actually see her performing. Really, really worth checking that out on the internet. Dialogues with some dramatic purpose or point. Short dialogues, again, learnt by heart, not just boring ones like, what's the time? It's 6 o'clock. Or, do you like apples? Yes, I do. Do you like bananas? It's the sort of stock textbook stuff which is really boring. But dialogues which have actually a little mini drama or story in them, even at a very, very simple level, like this one. Can I go? No, you can't. Why not? You're too young. And of course you can vary this a lot of ways. Another example at a slightly higher level is this one. I have this problem. Why don't we talk about it? I can't talk about it. It's a secret. Come on, you can trust me. They learn these by heart. This is the point. Learn it by heart so that they can declaim them, they can perform them, either by two groups, one opposite the other, each one role-playing a different one, by pairs, just practicing it on their own, privately, by volunteer pairs before the class. So these are sort of with growing levels of risk-taking, as it were, but as I say, volunteer pairs before the class. I wouldn't force people to do this, but as soon as 2 or 3 pairs have done it, the others are much more willing to try. Advantages of these kinds of activities. First of all, they're fun, entertaining. They're morale boosting. Hey, look at me, I'm communicating. I'm actually, if you perform a dialogue, I'm actually saying something in English, I'm being understood, I'm conveying my ideas, I'm doing it correctly. Look, I'm speaking English. And of course, you're unlikely to make mistakes. And you are accumulating useful interactive chunks that you can then use later in your own interactions. They can be performed, the dialogues I mean, in presentation, fast, slow, soft, loud, just to make it more varied and interesting and make sure that they do repeat them and learn them. You can vary the characterization, mood, personality, relationships, and later on you can add and change the text. So you can add extra exchanges at the end or at the beginning, or change particular words within the text to make it a different story or a different interaction. Finally, can be developed into an entire sketch or play, particularly with younger learners. I find that developing an entire play and performing it to the parents does wonders for their oral abilities, and very, very morale boosting and entertaining for everyone. My third section here was using scaffolding, where they're not actually learning entire text by heart, but they are working with frames of speech that are familiar to them and easy to use. So things that use a familiar structure or pattern that they can use as a basis to construct their own utterances, their own variations. For example, guessing games, conjecturing, find someone who, class surveys. I'll deal with each of these in turn. So guessing games are based on yes/no statements or questions. It's or is it. Actually, I've listened to native speakers doing guessing games, and they very, very often, I would say, in fact, more often use statements. It's a ball, it's a boy, it's a girl, rather than is it a ball, is it a boy, is it a girl. Much more natural in many situations. We don't have to insist on questions, but we do want to use these basic, very, very easy to cope with patterns of yes/no questions. It, does it, you are you, do you, and so on. All sorts of things like what's in my bag. The teacher at the lower levels with children, what do I have in my bag? What's in the picture? What's my job? I have to guess what the profession is. Who am I? A celebrity. What am I doing? A mime, and so on. There's an enormous variation in these. Very like guessing, but slightly different in aim, is conjecturing, which is like guessing, except there's no one right answer. You have a basis, a basic cue or picture, and the students say what they think it represents, or what they think is going to happen, or what they think it's all about, and all the responses are potentially correct. You might, at the end, decide which was the best answer, but all answers are potentially correct. For example, doodles. Okay, I draw a doodle on the board and I say, okay guys, what do you think this is? And they come up with all sorts of suggestions. Okay, a hat from above, a fried egg, looks like an egg. Yes, it could be, yeah, forget about the egg, think of some more things. A badge, a stone. It could be a contour map, couldn't it? Of a hill. A donut, right, absolutely. An island, ripples, a fat man. Okay, and so on and so on. And you just scrawl something on the board and you get an enormous number of answers. And then what I usually do with this one is I decide which I thought was the most interesting or original or best answer. And I say, okay, you come to the board and it's your turn. You draw something on the board and other people suggest what it is. So that's conjecturing. A variation on this one is, what can you tell about them? So I ask them to work out, possibly in pairs, how old they think she is, where do you think she comes from, what they think her profession is, what do you think their personality is. Okay, let's see what you say about this. She likes gardening. Yes, Maura, other? She's a grandmother. She's lost a bit. She looks a bit cross, doesn't she? Yeah. She's a beautiful granny. I don't think she'd laugh at it. It would depend if you laughed at her, Katrina. I don't think they would necessarily. She looks like a teacher. Lives in Paris or from Spain. An MI6 spy. Okay. So we get all sorts of wonderful suggestions here. Lots of people come up with different ideas. And of course, they can be at all sorts of levels of proficiency. She's a grandmother is fairly easy. Is fairly easy contribution, but Anne says here she's made a point she wants you to agree with. Okay, that's a more advanced student. So you get all sorts of levels and different kinds of answers, and you get some very nice oral fluency interactions going on there. And again, I move on. I can't ask someone else to bring a picture, but I move on then to a different picture the next time, and we get them to, again, conjecture what they think the person's character, nationality, and so on is. The third set of ideas was find someone who. Students have a set of questions to ask each other, and they note down the students who say yes. So, for example, find someone who chews chewing gum. So they have to ask, do you choose chewing gum? Find someone who's been to New York. Find someone who has a dog. And they have to make this into questions, of course, and they have to find out who says yes and note down the answers. There are various ways of organizing this. You can give everyone a whole sheet with a whole lot of questions like this, and they just find as many people as they can in the class milling around as they go. Or you can have a pile of cards on your desk, and each time they take a different one. Find someone, put it back, take another one. So various different ways of doing this, but this involves people milling around the classroom and asking each other all sorts of questions. Then there are opinion surveys, also based on scaffolded questions answers. Groups of students compose a set of questions for an opinion survey. So they help each other compose, they say them, and they also write them down. In this case, each student has a copy of the questions, and then they split up and they mingle in order to find out the opinions of other students in the class. So they're interviewing each other using the questions they found out, and then they come back together, collate answers, and report to the class. The last set of activities I want to look at here is activities based on simple self-expression without scaffolding, allowing them to express themselves, but with a cue and with this success orientation and game-like activities which will make it easy for them to do. So there's no preset learnt text or very much scaffolding. There might be a little, but the sentences students are asked to produce are easy at their level or slightly below. In oral fluency, incidentally, in principle, we're looking at language which is I-1, not I+1. Short. How about this one? This is a game. I call it reverse guessing. One person stands with her back to the board. On the board is a list of words that they need to guess. And the rest of the class has to give hints without mentioning the target word itself to help him or her to guess. And they try to guess as fast as they can. So, for example, I'll say how it can be played in teams in a moment. So, for example, you might have these items up on the board, names of sports. And they'll shout out hints like you can play it with rackets, or you do this in the water, and they guess. The person with their back to the board says as soon as they can what it is. But the main interaction there, of course, is the rest of the class who is calling out statements and hints. And if you divide them into two teams, then each team sends a representative a different time. So these names of sports would be one team with their representative, and then you put up, when they've finished, you put up another set of sports, and the other team sends a representative with their back to the board, and they try to get them to guess them. And the team which manages to do so most quickly is the team that wins that round. And you have several rounds, of course, and different ideas. Yes, Romany, it's like taboo, exactly. Picture dictations, students dictate a picture to the teacher draws, or in pairs, students dictate pictures to each other. and they draw according to each other's instructions, taking turn to tell each other what to draw. Say things about a picture, as I said in the interview, is one of my favorite activities here. You give you display in the front of the class, or you give each group a picture with lots of things in it, and you give them 2 minutes and say as many things as you can about the picture. Here's the picture. So they say things like, there's a man reading a newspaper, the man has glasses, there's a bookshop, there's a camping shop, an airplane in the sky, and so on. Doesn't have to be full sentences even. And a secretary notes down a tick for each idea as it's suggested. After 2 minutes, the secretary announces the number of ticks. And then they do the same with another picture and try to break their previous record. So they're not competing with other groups, they're competing with themselves to see how many they can do. And in my experience, this one is a win-win activity. They say an enormous amount, use an enormous amount of English. Everybody participates at different levels, and the temptation to go into mother tongue is minimalized because they won't get a tick for saying something in mother tongue, and they want to get as many ticks as they can. It's a really nice one, this one. Okay, for more ideas then, well, there's my book there, Discussions and More, but I would also like to recommend very warmly Friederike Klippel's Keep Talking, which is a classic. The Find Someone Who, for example, activity I took from her. She's got some wonderful things there, and I highly recommend. So either of those have lots more ideas like the ones I've been suggesting here. And that's it really. There's my email. So if you've asked a question, we've got a little time now for asking and answering questions at the end of the session. And if I haven't been able to get into your questions as you're asking them, there's my email. You can send your questions to me personally. I'll answer. But let's see if we can do some questions and answers, or relating to other points that you're bringing up, even if they're not actually questions, as we use the last 20 minutes, 18 minutes actually, of the session. Okay, Alistair, over to you.
Thank you very much, Penny. It's been an absolutely fascinating session. So we've got questions coming in already. First question is from Sylvia Zini, who asks about pair work, whether it's really beneficial to make students talk in pairs, and isn't there a risk that they're just practicing incorrect language?
I think it is worth doing pair work, and as I said before, whether they are using incorrect language doesn't worry me so much, as long as they are using comprehensible language, and they're speaking in English, not in mother tongue. I think that those are the things which need to concern us rather more than whether they're making mistakes or not. The thing is that as soon as you put students in pairs, say you've got a class of 30, you put them into 15 pairs, they're immediately got 15 times as much opportunity to talk as they would have in the main class. So even if some of the time they are speaking in mother tongue, they're still getting much, much more practice in speaking English. It's really worth doing. I wouldn't worry about mistakes. Mistakes I can deal with in full class interactions or when they do grammar or vocabulary exercises. I would rather that they felt the freedom to talk to each other in English without worrying if they're making mistakes, but worrying mainly about getting their ideas across and enjoying themselves.
Okay, thanks. I had a question from Christina, actually I think a few other people as well, who've asked about having students in one-to-one classes who are reluctant to speak. Whether you have any specific suggestions about that situation?
Yes, one-to-one. A lot of the ideas which I've suggested here can be done one-to-one. For example, the vocabulary brainstorming or the conjecturing or even the guessing can be done one-to-one. And the idea is just to get them talking in a normal conversation with you on the basis of pictures or games. I think in some ways it's easier one-to-one than it is in a full class, because in a full class some students sort of shelter behind the others and don't say anything knowing that someone else will speak. In a one-to-one, they have to speak. They have no alternative. So I don't know if that answers your question. If you'd like to make it more specific, if I've missed something, but please come back to me.
Okay, thanks. Got a question now from I've just lost it. Sorry, I apologize to the person who asked this, but one of our attendees asked whether you found it useful to put more confident students alongside less confident ones for pair work, or whether you find it's better to match people according to their ability and confidence.
That's an interesting question. I'm not sure what the answer is, actually. I've done both, and there are advantages and disadvantages to both. I would try to mix so that sometimes they're working with people of different abilities and sometimes they're working with someone of similar abilities. On the whole, something in the middle is best. If you put two people together who are both very, very weak and unconfident, they probably won't do anything at all. You run the danger, or they get very frustrated. If you put a pair where there's too extreme difference between them, they'll both feel frustrated and embarrassed. You want to try to do something in the middle. Put a weak student with someone who's a bit stronger but not the best in the class, and vice versa. So I would say somewhere in the middle is about right.
Okay, thanks. Got a question from Mario Mores, who asks whether you find that it's much easier to prompt speaking from a class with multiple L1s rather than a class where the teacher and most of the students have the same L1.
I don't have any, let's be frank. I don't have any experience teaching multilingual classes. All my experience has been with monolingual Hebrew-speaking classes, and I really don't know what the answer is. Who asked this? Because I'd like to hear what their experience is.
Moraes.
What's your experience with this? Or anybody else would like to type in your answers to this, because it's something which I don't feel qualified to answer, really.
Okay, so Mario or anybody else, if you've got ideas for that, please type into the chat and we'll follow up on that. Interesting question from Arnie Sylvia, who I think addresses a problem about trying to find activities that are going to be appropriate for students of every level in your class, particularly when you've got mixed ability classes. What do you do with more proficient speakers who are reluctant to speak because the task is a bit too easy for them?
I would try to design activities that are heterogeneous in that they invite responses which are more or less complex. So, for example, if you're talking about the woman there, remember in the conjecturing exercise, you can say quite simple things about them, but you can also say very sophisticated things about them. So I would try to direct the challenge in such a way that it is open to all sorts of different responses, which means that, of course, the ones that are based on learning by heart are less appropriate for that sort of class. You want to have ones which are, at least to some extent, open to variations and responses at different levels.
Okay, thanks. A question from Maura Casey, who asks about whether you've got any tips for how to avoid one student taking over when they're speaking in a group or in pairs.
Yes, that's a very good question. It does happen. One student takes over, or another student simply does not respond at all. So you have a problem there. Sometimes I'll actually speak frankly to the student, take them aside, and say, look, I know you're very, very good. Can you hold back a bit and make sure that the others talk? Sometimes I will give that student the job of being the chairperson or the group leader in a group discussion. So it is your job to make sure that everybody else speaks. And there are various strategies which we can use, but it's certainly a problem which I've come up against and which needs to be dealt with. in either of the two ways I've discussed or others which perhaps you can discuss as well.
Okay, thanks. Had a few questions about error correction. I know you spoke earlier about, whilst you didn't say never, you were trying to avoid error correction in a way that would discourage fluency and dissuade students from being engaged. But we had questions from people, including Mahananda Bahida, asking what do you think is the most effective way of correcting errors in fluency activities?
Before I answer that, can I just say an answer to a few things that have come up in the chat that yes, this PowerPoint will be available. Alistair will make sure that it's available to you, and he'll say how at the end of the session, so don't worry about that. Okay, the question about error correction. Particularly with the more confident students, who are not the topic of this webinar, but of course we have them in all groups, the more confident students who are making mistakes, I would stop them and correct them if they make a mistake. Because the problem is that if a student makes a mistake during a discussion, then that mistake is being reinforced if we don't correct it. He said it and it's remaining in his mind and it's going to stay there. And very, very often, I would say normally, I would, with a more confident student, stop them. I would actually make a pause in the interaction, draw attention to the mistake, correct it, make sure they've taken it on board, and then let them go again. But that's with the confident students, and where there is a real problem that the mistake is a common one, frequent one, important one, which might get fossilized not only in the person who made it, but also the other people who are listening. Okay. On the other hand, with my more unconfident, shyer students who are not speaking so much, I would try to avoid correcting even if it's a bad mistake, as long as they're getting their ideas across.
Okay, thanks. Got a question from Ferial Reed, who says, I do mini projects with my class 6. I let them use a pre-written script, which they memorize to a degree, and prepare a visual aid, for instance, a map. Do you think having a script is acceptable, or should that sort of thing be avoided?
I think it's acceptable as one possibility, not all the time. It's acceptable because it does, the advantage of learning scripts by heart is that they give you a whole battery of chunks of text which you remember and which you can then use as a basis for your own interaction later. They become part of your repertoire of chunks, as it were. I read a very interesting piece of research once about a class of Chinese learners who learned by memorizing entire books. And these students later on went on to succeed very well in national debating competitions, which have you improvising your own text. So learning text off by heart does seem to have value for our own repertoire of things that we can say, the ways we can express ourselves. I think it is a useful thing to do. Not all the time, but sometimes, yes, I think it is useful.
Okay, thanks. A question from Patricia Figueredo, who says, do you think it's important for students to know that they're going to be evaluated for their performance during a particular activity, particular fluency activity, or is it better not to let them know because they may get nervous about it?
You're assuming that you're going to evaluate them anyway, and the question is whether they know about it or not.
Yes, I think so.
I think if you're going to evaluate them, I think to be fair, they need to know about it. But I would evaluate them mainly on did they talk and get their ideas across rather than did they speak correct English. So, and I very often actually ask groups when they're working in group work, I ask them to evaluate themselves and tell me at the end of the activity what grade they would give themselves on how much English was being spoken and how well it was being spoken, and so not correctly, but how effectively in terms of getting messages across and exchanging ideas. Ask them to give themselves grades, which is also a nice thing to do.
Mm.
But to come back to your original question, if I'm going to grade them, I'll tell them, yes.
Okay, thanks. We've got a question from a very interesting question from Kismet Kale, who says, I have a group of older but beginner learners who are illiterate in their mother tongues, and they have great difficulty remembering vocabulary and chunks of language. Do you have any suggestions for that? That's slightly off topic, but I think it's quite an interesting question.
Slightly after, yes. Um, yes, that's an unusual situation and a very difficult one. I can understand that, and it's a question about really about learning vocabulary or learning chunks of vocabulary, either single words or chunks. And the key here is to find ways of repeating lots and lots of times and find ways of how to make this repeating interesting. So some of my ideas about chants and dialogues learnt by heart can help here. Um, Learning lists of words and then doing all sorts of interesting things with them on the board, like say things about yourself or link to words or translate into your mother tongue, all sorts of things like that, playing with them. But the key here is an enormous amount of repetition and finding ways to make that repetition interesting.
Okay, thanks. There's a question from Edmilson Chagas, who says, I find it quite useful to teach students to try circumlocution during fluency activities, so that rather than saying, how do you say a particular word in English, they find a way around saying that. Do you think it's important for students to develop that skill, or not so much?
Um, Two things to be weighed against each other. First of all, it's a very useful communication strategy to find a way round.
Yeah.
On the other hand, here's a golden opportunity to teach a new word, which they need, and therefore they're likely to remember because they need it. It's a pity to lose that. So it's a question of juggling. Very often in teaching, we've got two conflicting motives here. I want to do this and I want to do that, and they conflict with one another, as in the present example. And it's a question of making a decision on the spot there, which is more important to you at that point. Possibly you can make some kind of compromise, say, see if you can get the idea across. And when they've done it, you say, okay, great, that was a very good way of saying it. Now here's the word in English. So you get both.
Okay, thanks. A question now from Evgenia Belova, who asks whether you've got any advice on engaging students in role-playing activities. She's got students at quite low level who are studying ESP and are reluctant to engage in role-playing.
Um, I wouldn't go for role playing too much. It's much more challenging, particularly for shy students, to have to both speak English and to play a role, to imagine you're someone else, can be very, very daunting. I wouldn't insist on it. I would have them be themselves and encourage them to say things as themselves. I would reserve role playing and simulations, which are a kind of role play, for the more advanced students. I got quite a lot of examples in the book Discussions and More that Alistair mentioned earlier. But there are, I think, mainly for more advanced students. I wouldn't try to make the lower level students try to engage in this kind of activity.
Okay, thank you very much, Penny. I'm afraid that's all we've got time for today, but if you'd like a chance to win your own copy of Penny's new book, Discussions and More, then you'll definitely want to take part in our competition. So just follow the link that Lucia is about to post in the chat, and let us know on that website your top tip for getting reluctant speakers to talk in class. So that's the link beginning CUPALT that Lucia has just typed into the chat. Now there'll be more from Penny all this week on our blog. Yesterday we shared part one of our exclusive interview with Penny, and we'll be posting that link as well. And today we're sharing an activity from Discussions and More in the blog. So again, that we'll be posting that link in a moment as well. And also, don't forget that we've got more webinars coming up for you. Next week we've got a double bill. If you'd like more help with speaking skills, then at our usual time of 3 o'clock, the same time as today, Adrian Doff will be giving a talk called More Than Just Speaking, Developing Speaking Skills. And then 2 hours later at 5 o'clock, Pauline Cullen will be talking about how to improve your students' IELTS scores. That's a repeat of a webinar she did for us in 2014, for anyone who missed it, or if anyone who attended would like to ask a question. So, got those coming up. There's a competition with a chance to win a copy of Penny's book. There'll be both the first and second parts of Penny's interview on our blog, and also an activity today from Discussions and More, and there'll be another one towards the end of the week. If you miss any of our webinars, don't forget that we share the recordings on our YouTube channel and on our blog, and we'll be posting those links in the chat as well. You can keep up with all our news on our Facebook page and on Twitter. So thank you very much, everyone, for attending. Thank you very much indeed, Penny, for an absolutely fascinating session, really helpful. And wish everyone a very enjoyable rest of the day. We hope to see you all again next week. Thank you very much, Penny.
Thank you very much, Alistair. Thank you very much, everyone, for all your nice messages coming across now. And good luck with the teaching. Bye.
Bye.